has a good family driver. There are more Lego figurines than there are.
Okay, let's get started. And let me just tell you, I want to thank Matt Dodrill profusely, because you're going to see when the prayer list comes around. I put Leanna Coyle Carr's name on the list. The topic is her great grandmother is having a problem, and the whole family was called. So I don't know, did they end up going, or they were on a moment's notice? If she's afraid that she couldn't make it, I don't know if they ended up going or not.
They did not end up going, but she still needs some time to sort of think and process through that.
That was a tough time for her. She's apparently very close to her great grandmother in South Carolina. I don't know where in South Carolina, but anyway, thank you so much. Yes.
I don't know her name, but the mother of Betty Collins, she's 94 years old. You've probably seen her in church. She's tall, she has red hair, she nearly always sits on the back row. She is having surgery on Monday. She fell in April, and the surgery has to do with a bone, I think, that broke. And so, of course, Betty's very concerned about the anesthesia for somebody that's that old. So do pray for her.
Okay, we'll do that. Let's add her. When it comes around, Mark, please put that on the prayer list. We'll put that on here. Also, the birthday list is here. We have no birthdays in our class today. What other church-wide announcements today? I know that Sarah Stafford, is having her retirement party today from 4 to 6. Reception for that. I assume it's in community hall. I don't. Anybody know? Also, we are glad that Ray and Laura Snow are joining our class today. We're glad for that. We're glad for Faye and Mark to be back with us again. I failed completely and left the name tags at home, so our week was exciting, but I'm sorry about that.
The good news is he got a mate.
And I want to thank you, all the people that took food to the toppers. I know that Patty's going to do that on Monday, but she really appreciated it. Sandra, we appreciate you. Bonnie and Robert appreciate that. They sent us a card on this. They sent it before we brought our food, so they knew it was good.
It's so like a shower.
And so, anyway, there's a note from the toppers on that. Okay, any other church-wide announcements, and then we'll do our prayer requests at, if you'll turn it back over to us about 10:40, we'll do our prayer requests at the end. Thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate that, and we really appreciate you jumping in the last night.
Glad to be here.
You got all of Isaiah. So.
No small task. Yes. I sent around a handout. If there's one loose one,
There is.
Can you send that back?
Yep.
Thank you. All right, so I do have all of Isaiah. Unfortunately, I can carve that up into 2 weeks. So I'm going to go a little bit off script here and do things kind of my way, but that's okay. We're going to get around to Isaiah, just the New Testament, Isaiah 61 and all that. But I think I'm going to put that off to next week because there are really 3 Isaiahs, and we'll talk about that in just a moment about why mainstream scholarship thinks there are actually 3 Isaiahs. And today I'm just going to cover one of them. That is often called First Isaiah. That's chapters 1 through 39. And then next week we'll look at Second and Third Isaiah, which is chapters 40 through 66. Okay? So let's go ahead and jump in. There are 3 divisions in the book of Isaiah. Book 1, or First Isaiah, is chapters 1 to 39 that we'll cover today. Book 2, or Second Isaiah, is chapters 40 through 55. And Group 3, or Third Isaiah, is 56 through 66. But the question here is, why do we divide it this way? Why does mainstream scholarship want to divide Isaiah, one book, into 3 sections, or 3 books, or however you want to put that? Well, first of all, between each of these sections, there is vastly different use of language and theology and historical situation. It covers a span of roughly 200 to 250 years. So if if there's a single author of this text living in the early stages of the narrative, then we'd have to say that when he dies, he's about 250 years old. So if you want to offer that as a viable option, that's fine. Some do. It's one that I would reject. But the main enemy in 1st Isaiah, or 1 through 39, is Assyria. Okay, and we'll talk about that today. It's Assyria, the empire. The enemy in chapters 40 through 55 is Babylon. You have a completely different enemy. And then in 3rd Isaiah, 56 to 66, you don't really have an enemy. They seem to be back in the land of Israel after exile. So in other words, 1st Isaiah is pre-exile, although they're getting pretty close to getting sent away. Hence all the judgments, and Isaiah is warning them, you better straighten up or else. 2nd Isaiah seems to occur during exile in Babylon. And in 3rd Isaiah, again, they seem to have returned home. So that's why we split the books up into 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah. Okay? So the last major event recorded in 1st Isaiah is the siege of Jerusalem in 701. And Isaiah, in I believe it's verse 1:1, the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. And somewhere else it says that he receives his vision in the last year of Uzziah's reign, which we know is the year 742. So Isaiah's prophetic ministry is somewhere between 742 and 701 BC. Okay, that's when he's operating, the person Isaiah. So let's look at, first of all, any questions about that before we move on to the actual text? Does that make sense? 3 Isaiahs? Three different scenarios: pre-exile, exile, post-exile. Yep.
Silly questions, I guess.
That's okay.
With all of these kings of Judah at some one time, is that what they're trying to say?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Are all these names that says at the end, kings of Judah, this is a time when each one of them were kings? Is that
Yes, yeah, so all of these were kings of Judah around the middle of the 8th century BCE.
Okay.
Yep, yep.
What reason did we have all these different authors? Why didn't the 2nd Isaiah author make the book titled after him and so forth?
Probably because there is a cohesive theology in the entire book. And we'll talk about that next week, about why do these 3 books get scrunched up into one. I think it's because there's a common theology. It's kind of like Genesis. Genesis is written over a span of many, many centuries, probably edited over a span of several centuries. You could divide it up into probably 30 or 40 books. But since there's this cohesive theology, they went ahead and just edited it into a single volume. It kind of just helps us be better readers of the text. Yeah. And so it's kind of like an anthology that gets put together under one volume. And lots of books do that. All right, let's look at 1st Isaiah. First, let's talk about the prophet himself. Isaiah was married to another prophet. We don't know much about that, but in Isaiah 8, verse 3, there's allusion to this. So Isaiah is apparently married. He had at least 2 sons, possibly more, but we know that he had 2. And he had access to the kings of Judah. Isaiah is basically commissioned to be a prophet to the kings of the southern kingdom, that is the kingdom of Judah. And he has access particularly to King Ahaz, we'll talk about that in just a moment, and King Hezekiah. So the prophetic commission is to tell kings how they are to behave and conduct themselves as rulers under Yahweh's commission. Okay? The message to the kings from Isaiah is always this, and it's always very simple. Trust Yahweh. Wait. Don't rush ahead. Don't form alliances. Trust Yahweh. If I could summarize Isaiah 1, or 1st Isaiah, that would be it. Wait on Yahweh. Trust Yahweh. All right, Yahweh saves alone. Isaiah has a very sharp communicative strategy. He uses vivid language. He borrows language from the courtroom, so he often talks about as though he's a prosecutor and the kings are the defendants. It's a really interesting way of conducting his speech. And he often uses what we call sign acts, where rather than just telling forth verbally his prophecies, he'll act them out. And this is common in the prophetic tradition of Israel. So for example, he foretells Israel's being exiled to Babylon, naked and barefooted. And so to convey that message, he walked around the southern kingdom for 3 years, naked and barefooted. So being a prophet is not easy and sometimes embarrassing. Nobody wants to be a prophet, okay? So that's what you call a sign act. So Isaiah was brash, he was assertive, very vivid, at times angry, but he's not really an anomaly in that regard. This is the prophetic tradition of Israel. Again, he receives the call the year that Uzziah died, which is 742. And he receives a call in chapter 6. So let's turn to chapter 6. And if someone would be so kind to read verses 1 through 10 for us.
In the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him, which had six wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt is departed, and your sins are blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and say to this people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull, and stop their ears, and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears, and comprehend with their minds, and turn and be healed.
Thank you. So let me turn it over to you and ask, what in this passage of Isaiah's calling stands out to you? What do you think about this?
That he volunteered to go, here I am, send me.
Yeah.
That stands out.
Yeah, right. He volunteers.
But I would be a little skeptical here. I know I'm not supposed to be, but if somebody tells me they see an angel with 6 wings and they're flying and all this comes up, thinking, what do you want?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know God is appointing him, but how do you convince anybody that?
Right.
With this kind of stuff, you're coming forth.
Yes, quite the vision. Quite the vision. Yes, some vivid imagery here. What else?
One thing I find interesting is that he was even noticeable in the presence of God to the seraph. I don't know what the seraph's job is exactly, but apparently Isaiah made an impression on him.
Yes.
And the seraph understood that he had a need and met him.
Yes, good. Yeah, seraphs are kind of like angelic creatures that protect the heavenly host, or who are even part of the heavenly host. So they are sort of like stewards of God's work, so they often do work on behalf of God, as they do here. Yeah, good.
What about just on the surface, putting a hot coal on his lips?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Is that supposed to be like a miracle? Because most of us would say, unclean lips, well, we'll fix that.
One step past
Yeah.
washing your mouth
Yeah.
out.
So,
Yeah, don't try this at home. Yeah, it's probably a kind of metaphor for the sense in which God is cleansing Isaiah's lips. Because what's really interesting here is Isaiah represents an unclean people, unclean hearts and unclean lips, but Isaiah too, he's a product of this people. So let's not be under any impression that Isaiah is this like pure gift to creation. He's a human being from a sinful people, and he too needs to be purified. So before he's clean enough to be commissioned to give this message. Yeah. One thing that stands out to me is that God is just too big to be contained in the temple, right? Only the hem of his robe, even just a little bit of it, fills the entire temple. So Israel had this theology that God is in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And there's a sense in which that's true, and this kind of mirrors a cosmic temple that God doesn't even fill. God can't fill it. God's just too big, too big. The word holy is a very common word in Isaiah. It's not used all over the place in the Old Testament, believe it or not. It becomes more popular in the New Testament. But holy is an Isaiah word. The Holy One of Israel is a uniquely Isaiah term. Woe is me, I am done, or whatever he says in this translation. The better translation is I am undone. He's completely just shattered. He's melted, standing in the presence of the Holy One of Israel. Really brings into stark relief the unholiness of himself and his people. And what has always puzzled me, and what continues to puzzle all Jews and Christians who read this testament, is verse 10, verse 9 through 11. What God commissions Isaiah to tell the people. Go and say to the people, be ever listening but never comprehending. Be ever seeing but never understanding. That's not a great evangelism strategy, right?
I don't need to be told that, though.
You don't. What do you mean?
I mean, I already knew that. That's kind of how I rolled.
Yeah.
I didn't need that instruction.
Okay. Okay.
See and look and don't see.
Right.
Hear and don't understand.
Right.
Easy.
Okay. Good. But you would hope that God would tell Isaiah, go tell those people that even though they look and they don't see, finally see, you know. But God tells Isaiah to tell them, look, but really don't be understanding. See, but don't really be comprehending. And it's like, does God not want them to understand? What's happening here? Does anybody have any idea what
Is
might
it
be
a
going on?
challenge?
Maybe it is a challenge. Okay.
You can't do it.
You can't do it. Let's see if you can. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe. And there's no right or wrong answer here, because even scholars, they're all like, I don't know what this
This thing
means.
he's preparing Isaiah for a very difficult ministry,
Yeah.
so that he'll keep going.
Okay. Good.
But he won't get a good reception.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else?
How about the idea that they want them to try to realize that, if I can say this right, not to put a value or a name or a idea onto something, you know, like, for example, we talked about, you know, if you look at a font, well, it's a font.
Right.
But if you look at it without identifying it, you see this beautiful animal. And that could, you know,
Okay.
trying to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'm telling Isaiah that this is what you can expect.
Oh, okay. This is what. Okay.
Say it again.
So maybe he's telling
And
Isaiah this is
God
what you can
is
expect.
telling Isaiah, when you go to the people, based on my observations, this is what you can expect. You're
Okay.
gonna talk to them and they're not gonna listen.
Right.
You
Okay.
can show them and they're not gonna see.
So maybe it's not God saying, I'm going to cause their blindness. Maybe it's God saying, they're blind, and buddy, get ready, because that's who they are. Yeah.
Well, I can't believe there's so many different interpretations of this. Mine's different than that.
Go for it.
Mine is that he's telling Isaiah, he's dealing with human nature for people to make up their minds too quickly on
Right.
something, think they know something before they really know it.
Right.
And once you make up your mind, you know, it's hard to get you to see anything beyond that and change your mind and
Sure.
be open. So he's telling, you know, just watch for a long time and look for a long time, but suspend judgment or decision making.
Okay. Maybe that's it. It could be that this is simply God's judgment it's just overflowed, and God is saying, these people are so far gone that there's really nothing that's going to fix this except getting a slap on the wrist or something. Sometimes parents say, well, kids are just gonna have to make their own mistakes and learn from it. Maybe that's what's happening. I preached this text a couple months ago, and the way I sort of interpreted it was, you can look at something and you can apprehend it in your mind, but until you actually love it, you're not really going to understand it. And in order to love something, you have to practice. You have to be in love with something. So I talked about this guy in New York, this lawyer who told these Spanish-speaking restaurant workers, go back to Mexico, I'm going to call ICE on you, yada, yada, yada. Well, then he was filmed, of course, and he was made infamous. And then people went onto his website and found that the guy's fluent in Spanish. How interesting. It's like he's ever seeing, right? Ever hearing, ever speaking the language, but to really know a language is to know a people, to love a people. That's what it means to understand a language, right? So maybe God is telling Isaiah, these people are ever speaking the language, ever knowing the language, ever seeing. But man, they don't really love, they don't really use their bodies and their guts and really understand at a visceral level what it means to love me and love each other. Maybe, I don't know. That could be wrong, but that's my spin on it. Okay, let's move forward here. The times. Let's talk about the times in which Isaiah is working. There are three major historical events, but the backdrop of this is the division of the Israelite monarchy. Some of this will be rehearsal for you, but just an abbreviated version. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, enforced exploitative labor, particularly on the northern tribes of Israel. And the northern tribes eventually said, enough of this, we're done with this, we're seceding from the nation of Israel, we're going to form our own kingdom. And then from there on you have the northern kingdom of Israel, which is known as Israel. And then you have the southern kingdom of Israel, which is known as Judah. So whenever you read about Israel in these passages, normally they're talking about the northern kingdom. When you hear about Judah, it's talking about southern kingdom. So that's the backdrop of this. Yep. Yep, here you go. So this is the northern kingdom, right here. This is Judah, the southern kingdom. Yep. Okay, so three major historical events in 1st Isaiah. The first one is known as the Syro-Ephraimite War, and that's covered mainly in chapters 7 through 9. So basically what happens is the king of Syria, which is not the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom or even Assyria, it's a different kingdom. His name was Rezin, or Rezin. And then you have Pekah, the king of the northern kingdom, Israel. They form an alliance because they're afraid that Assyria is going to encroach upon them and colonize them. They ask Ahaz, who is the king of the southern kingdom, to join them so that their alliance would be stronger against the Assyrians. Ahaz says, no, I'm not going to do that. So this makes Syria and the northern kingdom paranoid. And they say to each other, well, goodness, if they're not joining us, does that mean they're joining Assyria? And so, right, this is what statecraft does. It makes you paranoid about what other states are doing. It's why God says in 1 Samuel 8, don't have a king. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. It makes you paranoid and scared, and it cultivates scare politics and all that. So anyways, Assyria plans to attack. Wait a minute. Let me back up here. Okay, I'm sorry. The northern kingdom and Syria plan to attack the southern kingdom because they think that they're aligning with Assyria. So now Ahaz says, well, goodness, since that's going to happen, I guess I will align myself with Assyria after all. Okay? And then Isaiah comes onto the scene. And let's look at Isaiah 7. Let's read what his response is. Does this scenario make some sense? I know there's a lot of players in this. Okay. Will someone read 7 verses 3 through 9 for us?
Then the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out and meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field. And say to him, take heed, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these 2 smoldering stumps of firebrands, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah, because Aram with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah has plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and cut off Jerusalem and conquer it for ourselves, and take the son of Tabiel king in it. Therefore thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand and it shall not come to pass, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years Ephraim will be shattered, no longer a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you do not stand firm in faith, ye shall not stand at all."
Good, thank you. So the message here is fairly simple. Don't do this. Don't make an alliance with another nation, especially Assyria. Wait on the Lord. Again, this is the message of 1 Isaiah. Wait on the Lord. Yahweh will fight for you. Don't fight battles with armies. Don't fight battles at all. Let Yahweh fight your battles for you. Don't do this. Okay, now let's skip forward to some really interesting texts. Let's look at 7:14 to 17. Will someone read that for us? 14 to 17.
Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land before whose 2 kings you are in dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring on you and on your people and on your ancestral house such days as had not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria.
Thank you. Anything sound familiar here?
Messiah.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like a messianic prophecy, but that is what it means if you zoom out and look at the big picture. You zoom in though, immediately the context is not a messianic prophecy, or at least it's not a. This isn't immediately about Jesus. It's about a kind of different Messiah. Remember, Messiah is basically a savior of Israel. There are many different messiahs in the Old Testament, and even in the backdrop of the New Testament. Jesus is just the Messiah, okay? So, Emmanuel means what? Anybody know?
God with us.
God with us. So the message here is that it's the presence of God, not alliance with other kingdoms, that will save you. It's God's presence. It's God's battling. It's God's fighting for you. It's Emmanuel, God with us, that will save us, that will secure Judah and Judah's future. Now, who is this child in the immediate context? Because it probably was a real child in Isaiah's context. Most scholars say, and I agree with this, that it's probably Hezekiah, another king that we'll discuss in just a moment, who was a good king and who ultimately God used to make the Assyrians turn away and ultimately secured Judah's future. So that makes a lot of sense that it might be Hezekiah. But basically Isaiah is telling Ahaz, here's a sign that things are going to be okay. This child's going to be born. His name's going to be Emmanuel. God's going to be with you. Look for that child. And then the text is pretty silent about whether or not that child is born, where he's born, who it is, and what Ahaz's response might have been. Let's also skip forward to 9. I know we got a lot of text here, but it's all pretty important. Let's look at 9, 2 to 7. Will someone read verses 2 to 7 for us?
people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who have lived in a land of deep darkness, and on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the trampling warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born to us, a son is given. Authority rests on his shoulders, and he will be named Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be an endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this.
Great, thank you. So when this text and when Isaiah 7 talks about a child being born of a woman, this of course is quoted in the New Testament, Matthew and Luke in particular, to talk about the messianic birth narratives. And the texts are ostensibly quoting the Old Testament, and it uses the word virgin. And we believe that Mary was in fact a virgin. But the problem is that in the Hebrew, the word is not virgin, it's woman, or young woman. So we have to ask, well, what in the world is Matthew and Luke, what are they quoting? Well, they are quoting the Old Testament, but they're quoting the only Old Testament that was accessible to them, and that is what we call the Septuagint. Anybody ever heard of the Septuagint? It's basically just the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Okay, and in the Greek translation, they translated it for some reason that we're not sure of, virgin. Not sure why. But in the Hebrew, it's actually just young woman. So in the immediate context of Isaiah, they're not talking about a virgin woman. They're talking about some young woman, probably Hezekiah's mother, in my opinion. So anyways, against the advice of Isaiah, Ahaz aligns with Assyria anyways. So he says, Assyria, come save us. And in fact, Assyria does exactly that. But at a price, right? We saved you. You are now in our debts. So Judah has to pay a massive indemnity, which is basically just a very large taxation price for having saved them, and they become a vassal state, which is basically just a state that offers military help if Assyria ever needs it. They basically become a subject of Assyria. So they're in their debt now, which is exactly why Yahweh and Isaiah said, don't do this. It's a bad idea. So what are the takeaways from this part of the story? Trust God for kingdom security, not political maneuvering or military strategy. Emmanuel, God is with us, is the pledge that God will not abandon Israel, ever. And that's true for us today whenever we think about Jesus. Okay, well, I'm running short on time here. I gotta move forward. The second event is the fall of Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom. Isaiah witnessed this, but we don't think he participated in it directly. Samaria is part of the northern kingdom. Isaiah was a prophet to the southern kingdom, and that's why none of this is written about in Isaiah, but we know it's happening whenever he's working. So Hoshea, king of Israel, relied on a promise of Egyptian aid, and he rebelled against Assyria in 725. Shalmaneser V laid siege to Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, and the majority of the Israelite elites are deported, and the northern kingdom effectively comes to an end. So from this point forward in the Bible, whenever you hear about Israel, now we're talking about Judah. Okay, the northern kingdom comes to a tragic end. And one of the things that the Assyrians do is they inject the region of Israel that was once inhabited by Israelites with a bunch of foreign people from all over the place. And there were a number of Israelites who stayed behind. Remember, so they didn't deport all Israelites. They just deported the ones who were rich and powerful, because they knew those are the ones that are the biggest threat. So what happens whenever these other Israelites who stay behind and the foreigners come together? They intermarry, they settle down, they have children who have mixed blood and all that. These are what we call, later in the New Testament, Samaritans. If you're ever wondering where that comes from. And they're very, very much looked down upon by, for lack of a better phrase, full-blooded Jews. Okay, so hence the kind of rivalry you see in the New Testament. This is why the Jews would have been offended by the story of the Good Samaritan. Utterly offensive. Okay? All right. Historical event number 3, and this is directly related to Isaiah's work. The siege of Jerusalem. Hezekiah succeeded Ahaz, and he's a good king. Again, I think Hezekiah is probably, in the immediate context, the son that's to be born as a sign that God will be with Israel. He wants to undo Ahaz's alliance with Assyria. He wants to undo all that. So what he does is he forms an alliance with Egypt to undo their vassal status and rebels against Assyria. This makes the king of Assyria very, very angry. That king is known as Sennacherib. And there's some awesome, Sennacherib diatribes in, I think, chapters 36 through 39 or something like that, where he's a mean dude. He is angry. And he stands at the gates and he basically tells Hezekiah, you know what? Yahweh's actually on my side. You've already busted down all the altars. You have nothing going for you. How many chariots do you have? And he lines the gates with all these chariots. And it's just a terrifying scene to imagine. And so he crushes the revolt, Sennacherib does, and then he comes to Jerusalem and stages this diatribe. And so Hezekiah calls on Isaiah, says, what do I do? And let's turn to Isaiah 37 to look at Isaiah's response. Someone read verses 33 to 35.
Therefore, thus says the Lord, concerning the king of Syria, he shall not come into the city, shoot an arrow there, come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return. He shall not come into the city, says the Lord. For I will defend this city, save it from my own sake and for the sake of my servant David.
Thank you. So basically, Yahweh says, you know what, the Assyrians are going to turn around. Just hold on. Wait. Don't act yet. And Hezekiah does. He waits. Hezekiah is pretty much the anti-Ahaz. So you have this juxtaposition between Ahaz, who's paranoid and worried and scared, and he jumps forward ahead of Yahweh. Then you have Hezekiah, who doesn't do that. He lets Yahweh fight for them. And mysteriously, we read about this in 2 Kings, an angel strikes down 185,000 people in the Assyrian camp. So Sennacherib retreats to Assyria, where he lives in a place called Nineveh. Right? Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. I know that's been on our minds lately because of the musical last week. I know it's been on mine. I was the voice of the well a couple weeks ago. Y'all.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
So I've been to Nineveh. Yeah. So the survival of Jerusalem here reinforces the royal theology of first Isaiah. It's the theology that puts a lot of importance on David's everlasting kingdom. God's going to protect the Davidic dynasty. He's not going to let Jerusalem fall. Not Jerusalem, not David's throne. Okay? So what does any of this have to do with the justice issues in chapter 1? Did I have us read? We didn't read chapter 1, did we? Did we? Yeah, let's turn to Isaiah 1. I know we're flipping. We're doing a lot of flipping. I'm gonna read for you 10, verse 10 forward until I think it's good to stop. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah. What to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. When you come to appear before me, you ask this from your hand. Who asks this from your hand? Trample my courts no more. Bringing offerings is futile. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and calling of convocation. I cannot endure solemn assemblies with iniquity. Your new moons and your appointed festivals my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you stretch out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rescue the oppressed. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow. And let me skip down to 21. How the faithful city has become a whore. She that was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross. Your wine is mixed with water. Your princes are rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not defend the orphan, and the widow's cause does not come before them. So what is wrong with Israel? What's going on here? What's Israel's main sin in these passages?
Narcissism. I mean, they're all about themselves.
Okay, all about themselves. We're probably talking about elite, rich, upper class. Yeah, Israelites. Good. Anyone else?
Pride.
Pride. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Convinced that if they're following the laws, then they're good.
Yeah. Right. And they seem to be pretty pious. Right. They're offering up a lot of sacrifices. They go to church. we could say they're like the most popular deacons at the church. They're pillars of the congregation, and they're always singing loudest. Yet they trample on the poor. They don't listen to the widow's need. The orphans, their cry goes unheard. And Yahweh says to them, one of these things is not like the other. If you're going to worship me with your neighbor. You cannot approach me by yourself as an elite who has a lot of money, a lot of fame, and a lot of meanness in your heart. You have to approach me with your neighbor. Who is your neighbor? It's the poor, the widows, and the orphans. And your job is to make sure that they're no longer oppressed. Okay? Actually be their neighbor. So that's the purity of worship. We approach God in worship as those who love our neighbor. Vertical worship of God is concurrent with our horizontal communion with each other. Remember that whenever George gives the benediction. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, vertical, and the communion of the Holy Spirit that is imparted to us that we may be each other's neighbors, abide with you now and forever. All three of those things have to come into concord with each other. Okay? So what does all this war stuff have to do with these justice issues in chapter 1? Let me quote the great Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann. Solomon's establishment of a militaristic empire based on heavy taxation led to oppression. People didn't have money. All the money was going to military aid. Also led to the development of an affluent class. So it caused a kind of class consciousness, upper class, lower class, and the establishment of a static religion that functioned to support the political interests of those in power. So you see here the intersection between a kind of military, jingoistic nationalism and poverty, class division, class warfare. We see this today. This is fairly relevant to our situation today, not just in the United States, but in the West, in the Western Hemisphere broadly. So Isaiah here is critiquing the self-serving royal ideology of the powerful. He believes in the Davidic monarchy. He believes in the kingdom of David. But he's saying, but be careful with that. And next week, we're going to see how he actually sort of ends up abandoning royal theology. The theology ends up changing drastically whenever they're in exile. Okay, other themes in, first of all, any questions? I feel like I'm talking too much. Questions, concerns, pushbacks, comments, outbursts?
My Bible says in those passages that he's comparing it to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
That's what it had become. And that people were going through the motions of sacrifice, but they weren't internalizing it. Hell, I would liken that to people who come to church on Sunday and then they're anything but a Christian the rest of the week.
Right. That's right.
I would push back a little bit on your Western comment.
Okay.
I think it's true all over the world.
It is true all over the world.
I mean,
Yes,
you look
indeed. I don't mean
you
to
look at the
reduce it to
Middle
the
East,
West.
you look at
Yeah.
Russia. I mean,
Yep.
stark poverty, and they spend
Yes.
so much on the militaristic state.
Yes.
It's like it's true all over the world.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. Mhm.
So
Yep. As a Western person, that's my context. That's naturally what I'm going to point out.
Sure.
But you are exactly right. This is a global
it's a
problem.
global thing.
Yeah,
Human-
absolutely.
Human problem.
Human problem. That's
Human
right.
problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. Human
Exactly.
problem.
Good. Okay. So other themes in First Isaiah. The first one, which we've touched on a little bit already, is royal theology. Isaiah demonstrates great concern for the house of David and the city of Jerusalem. Isaiah 37:35 says, I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. So there you see both of them. You see Jerusalem and the kingdom, and the Davidic kingdom being defended by Yahweh. The Syro-Ephraimite war that we talked about a few minutes ago, the threat was an attack on God's chosen city, Jerusalem, and a threat to replace Ahaz, the rightful heir of David. What they wanted to do effectively was to go in and kill Ahaz and replace him with a puppet king. Okay, which is not really the throne of David anymore. Let's look at Isaiah 11, 1 to 10. Will someone read Isaiah 11, 1 to 10 for us?
A shoot shall come out from the son of Jesse, and a branch shall grow up out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge, can I read that? Okay. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together. A little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Don't you go further?
Yeah, just read 10 and 11 for us.
On that day, the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. The nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling shall be glorious. On that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that is left of his people, from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Ethiopia, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea.
Thank you. I should give you extra credit because I actually didn't need 11. But I told you that. And then you had all those names. So if I had a Jolly Rancher, I'd give you one. Yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Thank you. We take this and pass it down. Maybe take one per every like 4 or 5 people take this so that you can all kind of put it between you and look at it. And we'll talk about that painting in just a moment. So the house of David in this text is reduced to a stump, right? The northern kingdom's been destroyed. There's only a remnant left over. But a shoot will sprout up from it, and it will be a light to the nations. This is, again, royal theology. God, through Isaiah, is promising that the kingdom of David and the city of Jerusalem will live. It will live. Do not worry. And then there's this beautiful vision that I'm sure most of us are familiar with about the lion and the lamb lying down together. And what I've handed out to you is a painting by Edward Hicks, who was, I believe, a Mennonite, if I remember right. If someone knows better, correct me. Don't take my word for that. But he was a famous painter, and he painted several versions of the Peaceable Kingdom. So this is known as the Peaceable Kingdom. And if you go to the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, some of his originals of the Peaceable Kingdom are there. I've been a fan of Edward Hicks for a long time. When I got there and saw this, I almost wept. I stood in front of it for probably half an hour, just marveling at it. Anyways, I just wanted you to take a look at how Edward Hicks sort of envisions this reality. It's not just a reality for Israel, it's also an end-time reality. We imagine the great banquet where there's peace between warring nations. Where, as Isaiah himself says, where we won't learn war anymore. We'll beat our swords into plowshares and our pruning hooks and however that goes. I can't remember the whole saying, but you get the point. So let's then look at God's rule overall. And I don't think we're going to have time to read all of this, but this is Isaiah 8, 7 to 8, and I'll read that for us. 8, 7 to 8. Therefore the Lord is bringing up against it the mighty floodwaters of the king of Assyria and all his glory. It will rise above all its channels and overflow all its banks. It will sweep on into Judah as a flood, and pouring over it, it will reach up to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. So here in verse 7, it's not Assyria that is doing this on its own accord. Isaiah has a very rich theology of God's sovereignty, and it makes me a bit uncomfortable. Maybe it does you too, but Assyria is basically an agent of Yahweh. It's a tool of Yahweh being used to steer Israel in the right direction, which will entail punishment. At least in this text it does. And then 10, 5 through 6. Ah, Assyria, the rod of my anger, the club in their hands is my fury. Against a godless nation I send him, and against the people of my wrath I command him. So on and so forth. So again, Assyria, the rod of God's anger. So God's in control. So on the one hand, it might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable that God would use other nations like this. On the other hand, it might be a source of comfort to know that God's in control here. Things are going to be okay. All things will work to the good of Israel and for those who love God. So would you rather God be in control of this or Assyria? So God rules over all in 1st Isaiah. The overarching theme in this book, again, is trust in Yahweh. Salvation is from Yahweh alone. Turning to other powers like Assyria and Egypt is effectively turning away from God. And then a final theme, then I'll turn it over to Dennis, is a kind of end times vision. 1st Isaiah is kind of always oriented toward an ultimate vision of what the end will look like. And so phrases like that day, which is a synonym of the day of the Lord, and remnant are often used. That day occurs 47 times in 1st Isaiah, so it's pretty important. Sometimes it refers to imminent deliverance and punishment, but oftentimes it refers to a distant reality of an undetermined final future reality. Remnant, look one more passage, Isaiah 10, 20 to 22. For though your people Israel were like the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will return. Destruction is decreed, overflowing with righteousness. For the Lord God of hosts will make a full end as decreed in all the earth. So here, Isaiah is thinking back on God's promise to Abraham to make his descendants as numerous as the sands on the seashore. And he says, that's not really the case anymore. It's just a stump now, just a stump of Jesse. But I'm gonna keep that remnant safe. God is assuring Isaiah and us today that there will always be a remnant of Israel, assuring us that God's election is irrevocable. And that's what we're going to pick up next week. We're going to think a lot about what it means that God elects Israel, what it means for us in here who are Gentile Christians, and how Isaiah's vision of Israel is not just instrumental. Right? There are a lot of Christians who make the unfortunate mistake of thinking that Israel is just a tool that God uses. It's a means to an end to bringing Christians into existence. And then once we're here, Israel doesn't really matter anymore. That's a grave mistake. It's a great mistake. Isaiah won't let you do that in chapters 40 through 66. Israel is not just a means to an end. Israel is God's chosen people all the way to the end of time. And we're going to talk about that next week. So, all right, thanks everyone.
Let's go through our prayer requests. Good. Okay, so we wanted to pray for Leanna Cormar's great-grandmother in South Carolina. Robert and Bonnie, Jeff and family are traveling to Florida this week. Safe travel today. Find a house to live in. So he chosen Florida.
Yep.
That's where he'll do his residency.
Yep, and he has to be there to start next Monday, a week from tomorrow, but they haven't been able to find a house.
And where in Florida?
Miami.
Miami. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. Okay.
Thank you.
Going on a mission trip to New York.
It's a group, yeah, but from the church, there's a group going.
Yeah, and this is a group, the group going on a mission trip to New York, okay? And then this is one from Laura Snow, that Betty Collier's mother, who is 94, is having surgery on the 30th. And the doctor's concerned about anesthesia at her age. Please pray for her. Anything else to add to our prayer list?
I would like to add one thing, if you don't mind. Abby, my wife, one of her dearest friends who lives in North Carolina, has struggled with severely acute depression, among other mental illnesses, and she's recently made her third attempt to take her own life, and she's currently in the psych ward, and this has been very, 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 very hard for Abby.
What's the relation to Abby? Abby's...
It's one of her best friends, one of her dearest friends. She has 3 children. She's completely unable to care for them right now. Her husband works full-time. It's just a really, really tough situation. And
where do they live?
They live in Durham, North Carolina. Yeah, so if y'all just keep them in your thoughts and prayers, we'd appreciate it.
Okay. Anything else?
I have a praise. My cousin Shai, who lives in Kansas, she recently has given birth to a healthy baby girl.
Okay. And your cousin's names?
Is Cheyenne.
It sounds like we have a protester outside.
What was that?
Oh, really?
Really?
Let's pray for him.
Yes,
For her.
it's we need to.
There you go.
It's got
Just one
his
person.
megaphone going.
Oh, I think he's been here before.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and Nathan, that was your Cheyenne's your niece, is that right?
She's my cousin.
Cousin, sorry. Okay, anything else? Thank you for coming, let's pray. Matt, thank you for
thank you.
See you next week. Dear Father, we thank you for this day, a time that we can come to put the business of the world aside for a few hours and focus on your word. Hopefully this will filtrate the rest of our lives so that we aren't just as Sunday-only Christians, that we do take in what you say and what you want us to do and act out on those directions, the directions you would have us. Father, we pray